If you like audiobooks or audio shows, check out a free trial of Audible. Just click the link in the description. You are listening to Mindshock True Crime. This is your host, Bruce McGuire. Today we are looking at the infamous Darlie Routier case. This one is much talked about, one of the most famous cases where a mother potentially, allegedly, killed her children that had a lot of news coverage, quite a bit, and there's still speculation on both sides of this on whether or not she actually did it, and we will be exploring this case in typical Mindshock fashion, comprehensive, exhaustive, and with logic and reason at the forefront. If you enjoy the podcast, find it interesting and informative, you can donate to our PayPal. Just check the link in the description. Help support Mindshock. Get more mind-shocking content out there in an objective fashion. Sorely lacking from any of the mainstream media and even most podcasts out there. You can also become a YouTube member right here on YouTube. Help support the channel that way. Get access to exclusive streams and chats. Make sure to subscribe to the channel, hit that bell for notifications, make sure you allow your device to have those notifications come through. If you're still not getting notified, just make sure to like and comment more on all of the videos. More comments equals the YouTube algorithm actually notifying you of the latest episodes dropping. You could also check us out on Twitter, Facebook, Reddit, and Patreon. Patrons do get priority for case topic, logical analysis, co-podcaster requests. You could also be a guest in the podcast depending on your tier. Questions, comments, theories, thoughts, suggestions, rebuttals, debunkings of any kind, leave them in the comment section. All right, as usual, let's do the quick rundown on the wiki, and then we will dive into the minutia and all of the evidence for and against, and every single possible theory floated in every single possible rabbit hole in typical Mindshock fashion. Darlie Lynn Peck Routier is an American woman from Rowlett, Texas, who was convicted and sentenced to death for the murder of her 5-year-old son Damon in 1996. She has also been charged with capital murder in the death of her 6-year-old son, Devon, who was murdered at the same time as Damon. To date, Routier has not been tried for Devon's murder. And the dynamics of this case are quite mind-shocking, if you will, unlike many other cases, so plenty to go over here. Damon and Devon were stabbed to death with a large kitchen knife in Routier's home, while Routier sustained knife wounds to her throat and arm. Routier told authorities that the crime was perpetrated by an unidentified intruder. During the trial, the prosecution argued that Routier's injuries were self-inflicted, that the crime scene had been staged, and that she murdered her sons because of the family's financial difficulties. The defense argued that there was no reason Routier would have killed her children and that the case did not have a motive, a confession, or any witnesses. In February 1997, the jury found Routier guilty of the murder of Damon and sentenced her to death by lethal injection. 2 appeals were filed by Routier, who maintains her innocence, based on allegations of irregularities during the trial were denied. Since at least 2018, DNA tests have been ordered multiple times after technology has advanced. As of 2023, the results of these tests are still pending. And you would think that they wouldn't execute somebody. I mean, look at how much, unfortunately, you can see, more than 0 is too many, but look at all the people executed that were exonerated after their executions by either DNA evidence or other evidence. It's really, really sad. That's why there's so much debate over the death penalty, because a lot of the times they don't even have the right guy or the right woman. It's really crazy how so many goofs have blind faith in the infallibility of other humans. Routier's case has been the subject of multiple books and television shows. Routier's ex-husband believes that she is innocent. Now, let's just dissect a couple things right off the bat here, because this is Mindshock. We gotta cover every angle. So, some people believe she's innocent because of how remorseful and emotional she seems, and there's definitely a lot of emotion in it. However, there's a few different types of killers. So there are killers, even mothers who kill their own children, that are totally sociopathic, or at least become sociopathic after the fact, there's no emotion, there's no remorse, there's nothing going on upstairs, or there's some kind of evil reveling in the act, whatever. Some people believe it's demonic possession or mental breakdown, mental illness manifesting, whatever the case may be. There's that group. There's also the group that didn't mean to do what they did and are very remorseful. Then there's another group where they meant to do what they did in the moment, but then after the fact, they are very, very emotional about what they did, and of course they regret it. So being this emotional isn't indicative of innocence per se. And then, of course, there are innocent people who are very emotional because their kids are dead and they're being tried for the murder of the kids. So there's all these different scenarios, all these different types of killers, and, of course, innocent parties. So keeping all this in mind, there's really not much that can be gleaned from reading her emotions, because without all this other information, she literally could fit into any of these categories. Now, obviously, people have their opinions, but just reading the emotion right off the bat here, it's very difficult. Also, are some alleging that she attempted to kill herself by slashing her own throat and then it didn't work, and now she's got to live with it? But if that was the case, was she not able or didn't have an opportunity to commit suicide after the fact? This is if she's guilty. So, yeah, there's a lot to discuss here. Of course, this is Mindshock. We're going to analyze everything in an objective and logical, neutral fashion. I'm actually not deeply familiar with this case. Of course, I've seen quick overviews of it in the past. As of yet, I do not have any particular theory that I am considering as a front-runner theory. We will examine everything step by step, attempting not to fall for any logical fallacies, of course. So continuing on here, and just addressing the ex-husband, again, the belief that she's innocent. There's, again, a lot of different explanations. If she's guilty, obviously he wouldn't want to believe that, the mother of the children is guilty, his ex-wife is guilty, because how does that make him feel, et cetera, some kind of denial. There's all these different possibilities. So what the ex-husband believed doesn't necessarily mean anything either. Continuing on here, the murders, June 6th, 1996 at 2:31 a.m., 911 dispatchers in Rowlett, Texas, received a call from the Routier residence at 5801 Eagle Drive. Routier told the operator that her home had been broken into and that an intruder had stabbed her children, 6-year-old Devon and 5-year-old Damon, and cut her throat. Police arrived within 3 minutes of the 911 call. They discovered a window screen in the garage had been cut, which indicated a possible entry point for an intruder. A search of the house and grounds did not locate an intruder. Having thus secured the site, police permitted paramedics to attend to the victims. Routier told the police that she had fallen asleep on the couch with her 2 boys while watching television, only to wake up later and discover an unknown man in the house. She stated that as she approached him, the man fled, dropping the knife in a utility room as he ran. After picking up the knife and chasing him away, Routier said she realized that she and her children had been wounded and that she called 911. Police found it highly suspicious that Routier and her sons had been severely wounded by an armed intruder without waking her until after the attack had occurred. All right, hold on a second. So we do have some red flags here in a few different directions. Now, this being Mindshock, my initial thought right now is that if Routier didn't do it, maybe she knows who did and she doesn't want to say. Would that account for all the funny business and inconsistencies? I mean, it's for a guy to just randomly... The other thing that stands out here, she wakes up and the guy is... this intruder, murderer, criminal is so terrified of her that he drops the knife and runs away? I mean, what am I missing here? That seems kind of odd. On the other hand, would Routier, would Darlie Routier really expect people to believe that if it wasn't true? I mean, is that going to be your go-to story? Let's say you're guilty. You kill your own kids, whatever. Are you really going to try to sell a story that as soon as this criminal murderer burglar sees you, he immediately drops his knife and runs in fear? I mean, that seems kind of weird. That seems kind of weird. Now, if Darlie Routier really has some kind of possible mental health issues or a mental breakdown, and she did do it, again, we have to examine the split personality possibility, because if she has a split personality, one of them did it, the other one didn't, so she would be passing polygraphs and all this other stuff. But that brings me to my next point, the brain fingerprint scan. I talk about this in a lot of true crime cases. This is a tool that, for whatever reason, is not being talked about enough. This is basically the new generation lie detector test that cannot be fooled. It was used, the only high-profile case I can think of it being used in, Stephen Avery actually took this brain fingerprint scan in the Making a Murderer documentary, of course, so there was no recognition of the state's case against him. So that doesn't necessarily mean he's innocent and he didn't kill Teresa Halbach. It just means that everything the state made up was complete bunk. So even if he killed her, it was not in any way as proposed by the state. So obviously a wrongful conviction and a sham trial. So other than that, I don't know that it's been used in any high-profile true crime cases, but this is what the CIA uses, and a lot of military organizations use this because it simply measures brainwave response to identifying information. So it doesn't matter whether you're trying to lie or trying to tell the truth. It bypasses intention completely. I still have to do a dedicated podcast on the brain fingerprint scan technology. A lot of people don't know about it. That will be coming up. Hopefully I'll get to that soon. Now, if you do have a split personality, it is curious on whether or not they've done those tests on people with split personality. But again, these are the red flags I see right off the bat, that the intruder, if the intruder killer is also some kind of guy with a mental health issue, and for whatever reason he can only kill people who are asleep, and he has some kind of weird quirk or mental issue, so he thought he killed her, all of a sudden she jumps up. Was he that spooked because he's in the middle of committing a crime and murder? Did she simply spook him by jumping up, and then he just dropped the knife out of just being startled, not that he was afraid of her? And then at that point, he just ran because he didn't know what else to do, because he had never been in that situation before. If this is some kind of weird serial killer that actually is afraid of people, and this serial killer only kills people in their sleep or whatever, or he was possibly on some kind of drugs. I guess you could come up with some scenarios where this would be plausible, but if Darlie Routier is the killer and she only has one personality, it seems kind of strange. Like, would this be the go-to story that the killer is just going to randomly drop the murder weapon instead of getting rid of it and just run away instead of just finishing the job? It's a little weird, or at least running away with the murder weapon. All right, let's continue on here. Routier told police that the assailant escaped through the garage. Investigators said that the garage contained no blood drops and added that indications that no one had run through there at all. The window sills in the garage had untouched layers of dust, including the window that had been cut, implying that no one had actually climbed through it. And the mulch in the flower beds between the garage and the backyard gate was undisturbed. However, an unknown fingerprint was found on the windowsill that did not belong to anyone in the family. 75 yards from the house, a bloody sock was discovered. Lab tests revealed it had blood from both of Routier's sons on it. All right, so this is getting a little weird. Okay, so what is the implication here? So if Darlie Routier really did do this, why wouldn't she have ran through where she said the intruder ran through to make it look like somebody had ran through there and then dropped the sock through that path? If she's trying to frame an intruder. That question still needs to be answered. Or, well, there's also another theory we haven't gone through. If she had an accomplice that was going to help her kill her sons, does that account for it? So whether she did the act herself or not, or with someone else and someone else did it, and she knows who it is and she was part of the plot for whatever reason, and then, would that account for a lot of the strangeness in this case? Like a lot of these famous cases that people just can't solve with 100% certainty, there's obviously missing variable. So we have to figure out what that missing variable is, and does that account for all the other variables? Because a situation like that might account for it. Both Damon and Devon sustained fatal injuries. Her wounds, described as superficial, came within 2 millimeters of her carotid artery. Okay, so this I do remember from looking at the case earlier. So what are the options? Is she that dumb that she's going to fake wounds right next to her carotid artery? I mean, that's kind of weird. Millimeter, we're not talking about inches. 2 millimeters? That's almost nothing. Or did she really do it and she tried to commit suicide by slashing her own throat? That would make more sense in terms of the location. And she just simply botched it. Routier was treated at a hospital, released 2 days later. Her youngest son, 7-month-old Drake, was asleep upstairs with her husband, Darren, at the time of the murders. Both escaped harm. Okay, so this is where it does get a little weird, because a lot of these cases with family annihilators, per se, I mean, that's the term used, the motive is an issue. Why would she kill those 2 sons and not the other one? Because a lot of cases when parents snap, they kill all their children, or one of the parents wants to get back at the other parent, so they kill all the children, possibly their own spouse as well, and then possibly commit suicide after. So was that really her plan, to kill absolutely everybody? And then for whatever reason, in the middle of it, she had a mental breakdown from what she was doing, or whatever other, I mean, we're talking about regardless of intent or premeditation. I mean, these are human beings with emotions in the middle of these types of acts of murder, even when it's not your own family. One could only imagine the stress or emotions, unless one is a complete psychopath, sociopathic, psychotic, whatever, then maybe they don't feel anything and they could be very methodical about it. But if they're not in that category, then even if the plan was to kill everybody in the middle, I mean, it's really not that outlandish to consider the possibility that maybe she abandoned her plan midway. Although the layout is also a little weird. So everybody on the first floor was attacked, allegedly. 2 of the sons on the first floor killed, the second floor, husband and other son, unharmed completely. Weird. All right, continuing on here, newscasts showed Routier and other family members holding a birthday party at the boy's grave to posthumously celebrate Devon's 7th birthday, 8 days after the murders. So here's the thing about that. A lot of cases where it's someone known to the victims, they could possibly commit a crime close to a birthday, as it's an emotional, possibly significant time. This is 8 days after the murder. So not an incredible long period of time, but not really within a 24-40, not right in that time period of the birthday. So yeah, that one's tough to see if that's connected in any way. She was shown smiling and laughing as she sprayed silly string on the graves in celebration, singing happy birthday. Family members point out that the newscasts did not show an earlier video that depicted a solemn ceremony honoring the children. 4 days later, June 18th, Routier was arrested and charged with capital murder. Routier later commented on the video saying, quote, "He wanted to be 7. I did the only thing I knew to do to honor him and give him all his wishes because he wasn't here anymore. But how do you know what you're going to do when you lose 2 children? How do you know how you're going to act?" End quote. Excellent point. So she seems kind of intelligent for even just bringing that up, because a lot of people, they don't bring that up. They're just like, oh, they're just, they don't actually elucidate the point or really think about it too deeply. It seems like she's fairly intelligent just from that. But yeah, it's difficult to read into that because, first of all, highly emotional state. And also, just from all the emotions, some people just tap into the happy memories at times, even at funerals. I mean, I think everybody's possibly had the experience of being in a funeral where there might be one family member who's oddly smiley or happy. That's the way they deal with tragedy, in either remembering the good, or that's just how it comes out through nervousness. It comes out that way. So, and also just the desire to celebrate the life. So again, I'm not saying that means anything one way or another. There's plausible explanations for both sides of that. In fact, I would argue this. If she really did do it, it seems, again, just seems to me, it seems more, if she was smart, it seems to me more likely that she would go out of her way to appear even more sad for the media or for whatever. because she would want to put up that facade to get away with it. She wouldn't allow herself to freely express possibly the emotions of whatever that can be interpreted a certain way. So again, just seems to me someone trying to get away with murder wouldn't be saying, you wouldn't come up with the story of, oh, as soon as the guy saw me, he's totally terrified and dropped the knife and ran away from an unarmed woman with her throat slashed. Again, if it was some kind of weirdo, I mean, maybe it did happen. Again, I'm not saying it did or it didn't, but if she's smart, why would she come up with that story? She could have maybe come up with something better. And then also, why would she just freely act this happy? She might be, if she was truly guilty, maybe she'd be more concerned about appearing innocent. On the other hand, there is an argument to be made if she's just completely insane and she doesn't care the way she looks like, or if there's some kind of narcissism going on where she thinks she's going to get away with it no matter what, so she would freely act that way in the video. You could also make that argument, and I will leave it to the Mindshock listeners to kind of come up with what is more or less likely based on their own viewpoints. But again, with a certain amount of intelligence, it seems, again, just right off the bat, offhand, without diving deeper, which we will do, but just right as of this moment, it seems like someone might want to go more out of the way for that. Because some people argue duper's delight, and they point to interviews of her, and they think some of these micro expressions and smiles might be duper's delight. Now, maybe they are, if she's guilty, but that's micro expressions. That's not minutes and minutes or whatever of laughing and being happy in celebration at a grave. That's completely different. That's not a micro expression while you're trying to fool someone in a duper's delight fashion for the cameras specifically. Because she wasn't even, so that's completely different. We have to make the distinction there. But let's continue here with the trial. Routier's trial began January 6, 1997 in Kerrville, Texas. The prosecution suggested that Routier murdered her sons because of the family's financial difficulties and described Routier as, quote, a self-centered woman, a materialistic woman, and a woman cold enough, in fact, to murder her own 2 children, end quote. Jurors also saw the silly string video. And isn't it unfair to show the jurors just the silly string video and not the somber ceremony video? Shouldn't they? If they're looking at all pieces of evidence, that seems a little bit unethical and immoral to hide that. It seems steering on the side of the prosecution, of course. Crime scene consultant James Cron testified that evidence suggested the scene inside the Routier residence had been staged. The prosecution also suggested there was a financial motive for the murders since both boys had a life insurance policy on them. Okay, the plot thickens. The defense contended that this amounted to only $10,000, not enough to cover their funeral expenses. What a great fair counterpoint. That's a relatively small policy. A lot of policies are like $100K plus, but yeah, $10K, and if their financial difficulties are far in excess of $10K, then how could that small, tiny piece of money compared to the boys' lives motivate a mother? Now, obviously, you can point to all these other evil people in history. That's fine. But if they're that evil, they don't need a single dollar to kill their children. And then the other group of people who are evil, but only evil in a greedy sense, where they would murder their children if the amount was high enough. This seems to fall into a category where the amount is so low that it's kind of hard to see how that would facilitate a proper motive. So the $10,000 wasn't even enough to cover the funeral expenses, let alone other financial difficulties. So, yeah, that's a fair counterpoint there. Furthermore, they asked why, if she was willing to murder for money, she did not kill her husband instead, as he had an $800,000 life insurance policy. Wow, okay. But that goes back to my other theory where maybe she did plan to kill all of them. But yeah, why kill the sons? I mean, yeah, that's hard, especially children. I mean, even if they were adult sons, you would think the mother would first kill the husband. I mean, that actually happens far more often. So, or the husband killing the wife. I mean, $800,000, that seemed to have, that might, again, I haven't gone through all of the details of their financing, but $800K, I mean, a lot of people kill for a lot less than that. But $10K, which wouldn't even be enough to cover the funerals, I mean, that seems counterproductive there. So, yeah, was the plan to kill the husband? Was the plan to kill them all because it wouldn't be believable if just the husband was killed and then she abandoned the plan midway through? I don't know if anybody's floated floated that theory. The defense also questioned why, if she killed her sons to preserve her lavish lifestyle, she left her youngest son, 7-month-old Drake, alive and unharmed. The counterpoint there, 7 months old. There's a whole lot of different types of killers. There's killers that won't kill children of any age, and then there's other killers that might kill children, but they would never kill babies. So again, to try to really understand the motivations in her mind and possibly changing motivations, I wouldn't take that as definitive proof that she's innocent either. I do not claim anything is true or untrue. This is, of course, Mindshock, where the motto is, the only thing we know for sure is that we don't know anything for sure. But if the plan changed midway through, or she always planned to keep the youngest alive, a lot of parents, especially mothers, they do have a soft spot for their youngest, especially if they're less than a year old. And so if the original plan was to kill the husband, including the children, she's looking at over $800K, that might be enough to sustain one child. So, I don't know. Weird. Routier was represented at trial by lawyer Douglas Mulder. I'm assuming no relation to the X-Files. Defense attorneys said that there was no reason why she would have killed her children and that the case did not have a motive, a confession, or any witnesses. They asserted that it was unrealistic to accuse Routier of staging a crime scene. Her attorneys advised her not to appear on the witness stand, but she testified anyway and, quote, withered under cross-examination by prosecutor Toby Shook, end quote. That's an interesting last name. Do some people think this is a psyop as well? How many people has Toby Shook left shook on the witness stand? How many cases has Mulder solved? This is or successfully defended. This is a weird case no matter how you look at it. Why? Yeah, the desire to appear on the witness stand. Yeah, there's so many different scenarios on including her being innocent and her being guilty, in which case she might want to take the stand. So but taking the stand and withering. So the fact that she withered, does that mean she's not a narcissistic cold psycho? Because a narcissistic cold psycho probably wouldn't wither. So was this just a desperate emotional woman looking to clear her name and desperately wanting to against all advice? And she just couldn't handle it? Or is this, again, a split personality situation where one of her personalities might be unaware that the other had killed the children? And perhaps it was a plot that was halfway finished and she changed her mind in the middle. Or, further theory, again, pure speculation, I'm not alleging this is true, just theorizing down every single possible rabbit hole. Was there a guy on the side and he's partially, either completely or partially responsible for the situation, and she didn't want to reveal who it was, even if she didn't commit the murders herself? San Antonio Chief Medical Examiner Vincent DeMaio testified that the wound to Routier's neck came within 2 millimeters of a carotid artery and that it was not consistent with the self-inflicted wounds he had seen in the past. How many people would self-inflict a wound right next to their artery on their neck? That, if they're trying to survive. If she wasn't trying to survive, then okay, that's more plausible. That differed from the assertions of her treating physicians who had told police officials that the wounds might have been self-inflicted. Tom Bevel testified that cast-off blood found on the back of Routier's nightshirt indicated that she had raised the knife over her head as she withdrew it from each boy to stab again. If they had extensive blood spatter experts go through all these different scenarios and the blood on her nightshirt only matched that scenario. See, the thing with blood spatter, in certain situations, obviously, it could point to, the most plausible scenario, but was she laying down? Did the blood smear? How accurate would that even be based on her movements after that? One crucial aspect of the defense case was the bloody sock found outside the home. While the police contended that this was merely a ruse designed to falsely implicate an intruder that had fled the scene, the defense contended that it proved Routier could not have committed the crime. Damon was alive when the paramedics arrived on the scene, and the medical examiner testified that the boy could only have survived approximately 8 minutes after receiving his injuries. Routier was on the phone with 911 for almost 6 minutes. The defense argued that this did not leave enough time for Routier to cut herself, stage the crime scene, plant the sock outside the house, and then return before the paramedics arrived. They also stated that despite her injuries, Routier's blood was not found in the garage or anywhere outside the home. The prosecution countered that Routier could have planted the sock before self-inflicting her own injuries, and that the medical examiner's stated survival time for Damon after he was stabbed was only an estimation. Okay, but an estimation within what, it couldn't be hours and hours off. Yeah, this is going to turn into a math problem, possibly, unless she had an accomplice. If she had an accomplice, this all kind of even makes sense. Or she's innocent and whoever did it. Why would they take the sock, though? This is kind of weird. Also, is there information police have not revealed in this case? Did Damon say anything in those 8 minutes? Or was he not conscious? On February 1st, Routier was convicted of murdering Damon. On February 4th, she was sentenced to death by lethal injection. Women sentenced to death under Texas law are housed in the Mountain View unit in Gatesville, Texas. I'm assuming the reason they didn't try her for Devon was just in case they couldn't get the conviction on Damon, so then they would try again. I'm assuming that's what it was. Post-trial claims and appeals. Defense attorneys allege numerous errors were made during Routier's trial and in the official transcript of it, as well as the investigation of the murders, especially at the crime scene. An appeals court dismissed these claims, as did a court ruling on her habeas corpus petition. In June 2008, Routier was granted the right to new DNA tests. Her appeals were remanded to the state level for improved DNA testing. On January 29, 2014, Chief Judge of the Western District, Fred Beery, granted a request from prosecution and defense for her case for further DNA tests vital to the defense to be performed on a bloody fingerprint. So it wasn't just a fingerprint, it was a bloody fingerprint found in the house, a bloody sock, and her nightshirt. In 2018, the Criminal District Court No. 3 ordered a third round of DNA testing with the backing of both prosecution and defense. Okay, that's something we don't see every day. Because in a lot of these cases, one side wants to block this for obvious reasons. Here, both the prosecution and the defense wants the tests. That's interesting. So they both want the truth. And does that mean they both want the truth and they both have doubts? Or do they just want to shut up other people? And of course, these are all still pending. Divorce, June 2011, Darren Routier filed for divorce from his wife, saying that the decision was mutual and very difficult, and that he still believes his wife is innocent. He said that they decided to divorce to end the limbo that they had been in since her arrest and conviction. Is this another first? How often is the woman in prison convicted and sentenced to death waiting for execution where there's a divorce after a certain period of time? This is definitely an unusual case. There's certain aspects of this case that make it incredibly unusual. I'm assuming that's why it was so requested on Mindshock to go through all of the possible scenarios and all of the evidence here. And of course, this was covered extensively in books and documentaries. So let's go a little deeper here. So this is DallasNews.com. Did Darlie Routier kill her kids? Doubts remain 2 decades later. If it hadn't been for that crazy silly string, Darlie Lynn Routier might be a free woman today. And that's another interesting point, that do most people believe she was convicted just because of the video and playing on the emotions of the jury instead of physical evidence? Because trying to read somebody's emotions after the fact subjectively, and again, a highly emotional woman, that's really evidence of nothing. Because again, different people react in different ways. So there's no real de facto way for how someone should behave in this kind of instance, particularly when holding some kind of birthday celebration at a grave site, which is a little bit unusual in and of itself. I don't know how many times that has been done. Maybe here and there, but I don't think that's a popular thing to do. This is by Tasha Tsiperes, May 10th, 2019. If it hadn't been for that silly string, Darlie Lynn Routier might be a free woman today. At least that's what many people believe about the notorious Rowlett woman now on death row after savagely stabbing her 5 and 6-year-old sons 20 years ago Monday as her husband and 7-month-old son slept upstairs. I mean, there's already an issue here because this writer is stating as if it's definitive fact that she did stab them. Shortly after the murders, NBC5 captured video of Routier with bleached hair, smacking gum and giggling, spraying silly string on her son's graves. Jurors in Kerr County watched the video at least 7 times before convicting Routier of capital murder in 1997 for the deaths of one of the boys. They ended up deliberating on the silly string. Her mother, Darlie Key, told the Dallas Morning News this week, "Silly string is not a lethal weapon." Routier's family says the silly string provided by Darlie's sister was part of a birthday celebration. Her oldest son, Devon, would have turned 7 that day. The party followed a prayer service for both Devon and his younger brother, Damon, but TV cameras didn't capture the tears, Key said. Only a frolicking Routier. Key maintains her daughter's innocence, saying an intruder killed the boys. And even 2 decades later, there are lingering questions in some minds about Routier's guilt. Some point to a bloody sock found in the alley behind the family's home as proof Routier was telling the truth about an intruder. Others don't believe Routier is innocent, but wonder if she really acted alone. And many people still have a hard time believing that a young mother could butcher her babies in cold blood. Prosecutors in the case believe the matter is settled, but it continues to wind its way through the state's appellate court system. No date has been set for Routier's execution. Her attorney and family say they believe new DNA testing will prove that someone else was in the home that night 20 years ago. They say the pending tests could give Routier, now 46, a chance at a new trial. "This is not solved," Key said. "They have not found who killed my grandsons. That person is still walking the streets." National news. The case of a suburban mom fatally stabbing her young sons and then faking her own attack to cover the crime made national news in June 1996. Photos of Devon and Damon Routier wearing matching white jackets and bow ties peppered TV screens and newspapers, and people had suddenly heard of Rowlett, then a town of 35,000 people. Police were called to the Routier home on Eagle Drive around 2:30 a.m. June 6, 96. Devon, 6, was already dead when paramedics arrived. He had been stabbed all the way through his torso. You know something else that's weird? So this crime occurred in June, the 6th month of the year, on the 6th in 1996, and Devon was 6 years old. That's quite a lot of 6s. That's a lot of 6s. June 6, 6, 96. Does anybody find that weird? He had been stabbed all the way through his torso. Damon, 5, was gasping for breath. He had been stabbed in the back and died shortly after. So they were stabbed differently? What does that mean? It just tears at your heart what those 2 boys went through that night, said lead prosecutor Greg Davis. Even 20 years later, it's hard to think about the suffering they went through. It's something you never forget. Routier had stab wounds on her right arm and a slash across her throat within 2 millimeters of a carotid artery. She was taken to the hospital where she underwent surgery. Another possibility, was that an accident that she slashed her own throat? If she's guilty and if she's faking her injuries, did she in swinging the knife, was it accidental that she slashed her throat and she didn't mean to? Could that explain that? She told police that Damon woke her up and she saw a man leave through the garage. The screen over a window in the garage had been slashed. All right, wait a second. So Damon, gasping for breath and possibly touching her, woke her up? Detectives quickly suspected someone inside the home killed the boys, and medical professionals said Routier's wounds appeared self-inflicted, and of course, other experts countered that. Police, doctors, and nurses who talked to Routier after her son's murder described her as unaffected by their deaths. She didn't appear to be grieving. The silly string video played into that narrative. You know, what's also curious, so different people would have been exposed to her at different times. So did the defense, how many people did the defense find that did find her emotional? And then the prosecutors found people that only saw her in an unemotional, disassociated state, which is also not unusual for a mother who's lost children. So yeah, I mean, again, it's kind of hard to dissect that, to give that any kind of meaning for one side or the other. Friends, family, and former neighbors described Routier as a good mother. She had no reason to kill her baby boys, they said. But that silly string video painted a different picture. It showed a gleeful woman literally dancing on her slain babies' graves. She was charged with 2 counts of capital murder days later. The defense claimed she was grief-stricken and shocked, Prosecutor Davis said. The video showed she wasn't either of those. So here's the thing. This is really how the case should proceed. Throw out the silly string video, because if that's all you have to prove guilt, you have a problem of a case. This is a wrongful conviction, even if she's guilty. If that's the only evidence you have of an emotional mother laughing, I mean, she could have, who knows what kind of psychotic break she could have suffered after the fact. And not to mention, supposedly there was a lot of grieving and crying in the ceremony beforehand that wasn't captured, or at least not shown to the jurors. So I would just take that out of the equation. What else do you have? Because if you don't have solid evidence outside of that video, I mean, how strong of a case do you have? Again, that doesn't mean she's innocent, but that just points to the strength or lack thereof in terms of the case. The silly string video became a key part of Routier's trial, which was moved to Caryville because of heavy pre-trial news coverage in North Texas. Prosecutors described Routier as a materialistic and self-absorbed. They used her bleached hair and breast implants as examples of that. Wow. I mean, that doesn't mean anything. What the heck? How many countless mothers with bleached hair and breast implants are there that are completely caring and nurturing and would never harm their children in any way? I mean, that means literally nothing. This is weird. Routier's appellate attorney, Stephen Cooper, said prosecutors focused more on judging Routier's character and grief than on physical evidence in the house, which he said pointed to an outside assailant. Now, again, whether it points to an outside assailant or not, that's where everybody should be focused instead of these character assassinations, which might not even be true. She was portrayed as this bleached blonde with enhanced breasts living beyond her means, Cooper said. She did have bleached hair. She did have breast enhancements. That doesn't make you kill your kids. Yeah, I mean, it's weird. You could state, like, what, 99.99999, a whole bunch of nines of mothers with bleached hair and breast implants do not kill or harm their kids in any way. So, yeah, this is rough. To get a death penalty, you need stuff like silly string and character assassination. Can't fully grieve. In the 20 years since Devon and Damon's death, Routier's family hasn't been able to fully grieve for the boys. I want my daughter home, Key said, and then we'll grieve together for Devon and Damon. Key regularly visits her daughter at the Mountain View unit in Gatesville. She plans to be there Monday on the 20th anniversary of the boys' murders. She won't be allowed to hug or touch her daughter. They'll sit separated by a pane of glass. Routier declined interview requests for this story. Key says she never once questioned her daughter's innocence. She and her family believe prosecutors wronged Routier, who has not been able to hug or touch her now 20-year-old son, Drake, since her conviction. How do they give Drake his entire childhood without his mommy except through the glass? Key asked. Drake lives in Lubbock with his father. Darlie and Darren Routier divorced in 2011. Neither Darren nor Drake could be reached for comment, but Darren Routier had previously said he believes his ex-wife is innocent. After the murders, Drake was put in the custody of his paternal grandparents, but he lived with several relatives over the years. At 17, he was diagnosed with leukemia. He is still undergoing cancer treatment, but is expected to survive, Key said. I think it bothered him the first time he was able to talk to his mother on the phone was to tell her he had cancer, she said. Wow. Here's the thing, though. Like, after the kid is 18, I mean, it's kind of up to him. I mean, even before, I guess, what he wants to believe about his own mother. I mean, obviously, no kid would want to believe that his mother did this. But here's the thing. This is why intuition sometimes gets a bad name, because you do have like bad apples and people who do not have accurate intuition. But I would argue that that in the majority of cases, a mother, unless she's lying to cover for her daughter, a mother could have inklings of whether or not her daughter would be capable of something like that. So there's unwavering love and support, and in other cases there's wavering love and support even when the family member is innocent. So we have to keep all these things in mind. But again, it's just so tough. It's so tough. And then the tragedy of her, the surviving son having leukemia. I mean, that's horrible. I mean, there are also some irregularities per se regarding Drake and Darren Routier, which I will get to in a moment. But let's finish this article here. And again, intuition of a kid. Would a kid be able to tell whether or not his mother was capable of this? And again, if she has a split personality, perhaps that could also foggy things up. Prosecutors skeptical. For 20 years, the gist of Routier's story has remained the same. She woke up to a man in her home and chased him out through the garage. But to prosecutors and other skeptics, some of Routier's details of the attack don't add up. How could Routier, a purported light sleeper, not wake up while her sons were brutally attacked and her own throat was slashed? How was she able to fight off an attacker but not notice her children were bloody on the floor? And why would an innocent woman mention to a 911 operator that she touched the butcher knife and hoped police could still pull fingerprints of the assailant? Because maybe she did? I mean, this is kind of weird. If she's relatively smart, yeah, that's tough. It almost seems like only an innocent person or possibly a guilty person with a split personality would go through these motions, or possibly a complete unhinged loon if she's guilty. In the days after her son's deaths, Routier and her husband gave interviews to local media. She talked to nurses in the hospital. She talked to police. Each time her story was a little different, said attorney Toby Shook. Man, what a name. Who served as a prosecutor on the case. Shook is now a Dallas criminal defense attorney. When Routier took the witness stand, she testified all day before a standing room only crowd, claiming she suffered traumatic amnesia. She said she couldn't remember and slept through the murder, said Shook, who cross-examined Routier. But whenever she needed to explain the evidence, she had a good memory. She claimed a vacuum sat atop her bloody footprints because she had trouble walking and needed to use it as a cane. That made no sense because her legs worked just fine, Shook said. She said her blood was around the kitchen sink because she applied wet towels to her boy's wounds. Prosecutors said Routier probably cut her own throat over the sink. They described her injuries as superficial. If she had been attacked, her injuries would have been far, far worse, Shook said. How would he know? What? I mean, what the heck? This is such a weird case because you could plausibly explain everything on both sides. That's what makes this such a tough one. Because seemingly you could explain things both for her being innocent and guilty. The two R's. Routier and Rowlett are still linked. News crews and people with cameras still visit the 2-story red brick house on Eagle Drive, which looks mostly the same as it did that night. Blow Hartley and his family still live down the street from the Routier house. He remembers seeing police carrying out the kitchen sink where they said she washed the knife used to kill the boys. We were all freaking out. She came over to my neighbor's house that day and said, somebody killed my kids. And we believed her, Hartley said. Why would you think a mom would do that? You wouldn't. New people eventually moved into the house and asked Hartley to put in tile for them. When I got there and started surveying, you could actually still see the chips in the concrete where the knife hit. You know, when she did it, he said, and I said, nope, this is too weird. New people have moved into the neighborhood, which was rocked recently by a rare December tornado. Like many people nationwide, those in the neighborhood now disagree on Routier's guilt. I've seen the documentaries in the news, and I think she's innocent, said Carl Hust, The husband upstairs asleep and doesn't hear anything. I think he had something to do with it. When he tells people he's from Rowlett, people ask if he knows about her or believes she's innocent. But others, like Patsy Thomas, studied the case after moving to the neighborhood and believe Routier did it. Every time I go by that house, I get sad, Thomas said, and there's not a time I round that corner when I don't think about those children. Bloody sock mystery. Routier's supporters often point to a bloody sock found in the alley 75 yards from the family's home. Yeah, that's not that close. I mean, that's 3/4 of a football field. I mean, that's tough. The sock had blood droplets from both Damon and Devon. Her supporters believe the sock proves that there was no way Routier killed her sons, stabbed herself, cut the window, and had time to run barefoot down the alley, all while leaving no blood trail of her own. Did someone look at her feet, though, to see if she had run down the alley? Or did she put shoes on, run down the alley, come back, take them off? The medical examiner testified Damon, and is that a random thing to do to prove that there was an intruder? You're going to touch the knife, you're going to make up the story that the intruder was afraid of an unarmed woman and just simply ran away and dropped the murder weapon. And at the same time, you're going to think to put a bloody sock 75 yards down an alley? That seems kind of random. I mean, nothing really adds up here. This is really one of the most perplexing mysteries, I have to say. It's tough here. I mean, there's a plausible explanation seemingly for every single situation, but she would have to, if she's completely insane, I guess she could be guilty, yes. But it's difficult to rectify her being guilty and sane from all of these purported choices that she made that night. The medical examiner testified Damon could have survived about 8 minutes with his wounds. Because Routier's 911 call lasted nearly 6 minutes and the boy was alive when paramedics arrived, many believe it would have been impossible for Routier to stage the crime scene and take the sock to the alley. I mean, could she have stabbed him? Yeah, that's tough. I mean, 6 minutes. Yeah, this is a math problem. I mean, unless some people are going to say she took his blood from when he was alive, not that day, from let's say an earlier day or a week ago, maybe he skinned his knee falling from a bike or something, and she had his blood, put it on the sock, put it in the alley before she stabbed anybody. Theoretically, I guess you did, but why would she put a sock 75 yards down? I mean, that's a weird distance. I mean, if it was right next to the house, it'd almost make more sense, but I don't know. Lloyd Harrell, a private investigator who worked on Routier's defense team, still questions how Routier was able to cut her own throat at the angle it was slashed and stab herself in her dominant right arm. And he said the way Routier described waking up sounds more like coming to after passing out, not sleeping. Routier, well, also, so if she's got blood loss from this neck wound right next to her carotid artery, and she's in a state of shock, I mean, would her memory, are we expecting her memory to be infallible? I mean, and add all the emotions to it. I mean, I don't know. Why would her memory be perfect in that situation? I mean, whose would? Routier's defense and appeals attorney have also pointed to an unidentified bloody fingerprint found on the coffee table in the family room. But Prosecutor Davis said Routier supports cherry-pick pieces of evidence to support their theory that she's in it. Cherry-pick? I mean, that's kind of an important thing. A bloody fingerprint right there on the coffee table in the middle of the room where they're getting killed? That's cherry-picking? That might be the most significant piece of evidence. And that fingerprint does not match her? I mean, you would think they checked it against the husband as well. So, wow. I mean, this is insane. This is completely insane. They put more stock in a video at a cemetery of a distraught mother looking happy than they do in a bloody fingerprint right next to the victims. I mean, this is kind of weird. It's important to know the totality of the evidence. The totality of the evidence is what convinced the jury, he said. Not all evidence is equal, though. I mean, what the heck? Cooper, Routier's appellate attorney, said he understands why a jury convicted her, even though he believes she's innocent. Everyone wants to get vindication for these kids getting slaughtered in their own home. And I get that, he said. Jurors want to believe their government has got the right person. All sorts of authority-worshipping cultists and bootlickers out there. It's unclear how long the additional DNA testing will take or whether Routier will ever get another trial. The State Court of Criminal Appeals upheld her conviction in 2003. This is kind of weird. Like, there's an unidentified bloody fingerprint. It's not like it's a fingerprint that's not bloody or might not have been connected to that. Because if it's just a random fingerprint that could have been there from weeks before, I mean, this is supposedly a bloody fingerprint. Right next to the body's like, what the heck? Davis, who has prosecuted more than 20 death penalty cases in Dallas, Collin, and McLennan counties, said it's unusual that Routier still remains on death row. He said most of his cases have been resolved after 10 years. The defense has yet to poke a credible hole in the case. That speaks to the strength of the evidence before the jury, he said. What evidence? A video at a cemetery? Like, why is he not citing, like, definitive pieces here? But that hasn't stopped Routier's family and friends from standing behind her. There's so many exonerations now, Key said, and I just keep thinking, when is it Darlie's turn? It's a good question. If she was wrongfully convicted. Well, I mean, it is a wrongful conviction even if she's guilty because there's no evidence here. If there wasn't the bloody fingerprint, I mean, I could understand. I mean, there's some circumstantial evidence there. You still have to make the math work on the bloody sock, though. If there was no bloody sock or the unidentified bloody fingerprint, then you only have the weird issue of the location and the exact manner of her inflicting these wounds on herself. Because that's also strange. Can it be 100% verified someone is able to do that? And would they do that so close to the carotid artery unless they were trying to kill themselves and they failed? I mean, there's some weird issues here too. June 98, Routier's relatives filed a lawsuit accusing 2 police detectives and a prosecutor of invading their privacy by hiding microphones at the boys' graves. Wow. That's crazy. I mean, were they hoping to, like, elicit some sort of confession? I mean, that's kind of weird. So it seems like they really just zeroed in on her right away. Did they even possibly investigate any other avenue other than her and possibly the husband? And we will get to the husband in a moment. I'm going to go over one more in-depth article here. Maybe Darlie didn't do it, by Skip Hollinsworth on TexasMonthly.com, July 2002. A little bit closer to the time of the murders. 5 years after she was convicted of murdering her son, Darlene Routier sits on death row in Gatesville, still maintaining her innocence. This month, as her lawyers prepared to head into court again, new information about her raises the possibility, however slim, that she's been telling the truth all along. I have to say, though, this photo looks a little strange of Darlie behind the shatterproof glass in the visitors area at the Mountain View unit in Gatesville. I mean, is this the look of someone hopeful again, everything in this case has a plausible explanation on both sides. Because is it the look of someone who's hopeful that they're going to be exonerated? Because this is a few years in, of course. I mean, I don't know what she looks like right now. It would be interesting to compare whether she's lost hope or not. Does this look like she's hopeful of an exoneration, or does it look like she's deranged? I mean, I can't tell. I really can't tell here because it almost seems like just about every piece of evidence can land on both sides. I mean, other than that bloody fingerprint, that needs to be matched. I mean, that's just weird. Okay. If you haven't seen Darlie Routier since she was sent to death row 5.5 years ago, if your only memories of her are the glamorous photos when her hair was platinum blonde, her face was caked with makeup, and her fingers were covered with diamond rings, you might not recognize her today. She is now 32 years old. Her hair is long and chestnut brown and pulled away from her face, accentuating her cheekbones and bright hazel eyes. Her body is toned thanks to a daily workout regime of 500 sit-ups in her cell and a vigorous 2-hour walk in the prison yard. When she takes her seat behind the shatterproof glass in the visitors area of the Mountain View unit in Gatesville, she smiles pleasantly, rests her elbows on the table, with a soft giggle, says that she has been reading the latest Harry Potter book so she can talk about the plot with her youngest son, Drake, age 6, the only one of her children who is still alive. Okay, this makes me think of yet another theory. If she's innocent Is she kind of just this bubbly personality, and that's why even in tragic times she's still able to laugh about it? I mean, doesn't everybody know at least one person kind of like that? Like, even in tragedy, they're still able to laugh. That's just their personality. I mean, yeah, it's tough because accurately understanding her personality is kind of important if you're going to read into all of this. Again, I don't even really want to go down that rabbit hole for this particular case because there's explanations on all these different sides for her behavior. So it seems better just to focus on physical evidence. She receives a constant stream of visitors, friends and family, lawyers, journalists, and PIs. They study her the same way that crowds at the Louvre stare through a sheet of bulletproof glass into the enigmatic eyes of the Mona Lisa. Perhaps a tad dramatic here. They listen to her talk in her light, sugary voice about the sympathetic letters she receives from other parents who have lost their children, about her prison job cross-stitching baby blankets that are later sold to state prison employees, about the stories that she reads in Parenting Magazine, which she receives every month, and about her disbelief that she's still in prison. Why is this happening to me, she says with a catch in her throat. Why is it so hard for people to see the truth? On June 6, 96, Devon Routier, who was 6, and Damon, 5, were murdered as they slept on the ground floor of the family's well-kept brick home in Rowlett, a suburb east of Dallas. Devon was stabbed twice in the chest with such force that the knife almost went all the way through his body. Damon, well, here's another point, too, because this is a small-statured 20-some-year-old woman. Has anybody done the physics calculations? I mean, yeah, the kid is relatively small, but I wonder if they measured somebody of her body type being able to exert enough force to do that. Damon was stabbed half a dozen or more times in the back. And here's the other thing, too. I mean, we were talking about this in the Idaho student homicides, because if this was a single killer in the Idaho student homicides where it killed 4 people, just the repeated stabbings, that's got to be exhaustive. I mean, what kind of shape does someone have to be in? I mean, it looks from all accounts here that Darlie wasn't quite a physical specimen or an athlete in any way. She was kind of this soft, bubbly blonde, whatever. Now, again, when someone goes crazy, obviously they can exert more strength than usual, but I mean, I don't know if people have talked about that. So Damon was stabbed half a dozen times or more in the back, and Devon stabbed only twice, but the knife went almost all the way through his entire body. Would a female of her stature be capable of that? I actually don't know. Again, I wonder if they actually did tests on that, like with a dummy or whatever. Because in the JonBenet Ramsey case, they did the test on whether or not Burke would have been strong enough to exert the damage on JonBenet's skull. And supposedly he would not. I mean, there's some conflict there. There's, whatever. Some people think he could. It might be within a certain threshold of margin of error. But I wonder if they did tests with Darlie here. Now, in prison, supposedly she's in a lot better shape. She does all this working out, etc. Maybe she could. But at that time, was she able to? Darlie, who was also sleeping downstairs, had 2 slice wounds in her right forearm and 1 in her left shoulder, and her throat had been cut. Wow, okay. So yeah, you would think if she's going to self-inflict, it'll be like, arms, maybe shoulder, but then also her throat. That seems unusual. Doctor said she survived only because the knife stopped 2 millimeters short of her carotid artery. Yeah, I mean, that's a rough detail. Between that and the bloody fingerprint, I might possibly have to lean slightly towards innocence here. In a written statement given to police a few days later, Darlie, then 26, told the following story. She was awakened by Damon. I mean, of course, brain fingerprint scan. I mean, you would think she would agree to it. I mean, she's eager to be exonerated. Why not do the brain fingerprint scan? That could settle that. And of course, the husband, too. I'd be very curious in him getting a brain fingerprint scan. She was awakened by Damon's cries of mommy, mommy. In the dark, she didn't even notice she was hurt. She saw. And again, that actually does speak to truth, because if anybody's ever been cut, even just, making dinner or something, you have a cut with a really sharp knife. A lot of times you don't even notice. Like, I remember cutting something, I cut my thumb, and it was until like a minute or two later, I saw the blood all over the place, but I didn't actually feel the cut. So that might actually point to her telling the truth there as well. Because if she's this 20-some-year-old Texas bleached blonde, presumably she's not super intelligent. I don't know. Maybe if anybody knows her academic background, maybe I'm being a little superficial here. But if she's innocent, perhaps she would just say it like she believed it, and she wouldn't necessarily think about whether or not say it as she believed it happened. She's saying the truth the best of her ability, and she's not necessarily thinking about how other people are going to observe it or take it or think she's innocent or guilty. If she's more on the simple side. Obviously, not all bleach blondes are simple. Some of them are very smart. Again, I'm not claiming to know which is which, but yeah, this is very problematic, of course. She saw a man moving through the kitchen and followed him as he went toward the garage. When she got to the utility room, she saw a knife and picked it up. Only then, she said, did she return. So she didn't see him drop the knife, per se? Only then, she said, did she return to find Devon and Damon and realize that she had been stabbed too. Darlie's husband, Darren, there's a lot of, what are the chances that Darlie has a husband named Darren? I mean, that's almost the exact same name. Okay, they choose their kids' names, but they don't choose their own names. Darlie and Darren on 6/6/96. Surprised this didn't happen at 6 a.m. But yeah, this is weird. Okay, Darlie's husband, Darren, who was sleeping upstairs with their infant son, Drake, came downstairs after hearing his wife's screams and began administering CPR to Devon. By then, the assailant had disappeared. 12 days after Damon's and Devon's deaths, the police arrested Darlie for their murders. They had no eyewitnesses, no confession, no motive. What they did have was an intriguing trail of circumstantial evidence that suggested there was no intruder that night, physical evidence suggesting that Darlie had staged the crime, doctors' statements suggesting her wounds were self-inflicted, and a peculiar scene caught on videotape a few days after the murders. On what would have been Devon's 7th birthday, Darlie drove to the cemetery with family and friends, wished her son a happy birthday, and then sprayed silly string all over the grave. Here's a mother who has supposedly been the victim of a violent crime, said Dallas County Assistant District Attorney Greg Davis, the lead prosecutor in the case. She has just lost 2 children, and yet she's out literally dancing on their graves. I mean, does she have the mental processing to deal with this? So again, yeah, that really doesn't, I don't know, call me crazy, but that doesn't really mean it. That video doesn't mean anything to me. Within 8 months of the crime, Darlie was convicted and sentenced to death by a jury in the hill country town of Caryville, where the trial had been moved. She seemed destined to be remembered as yet another stressed-out mother who had suddenly spiraled out of control. 3 true crime paperbacks published in the year after her conviction characterized her as the embodiment of evil. But over the years, numerous news stories and an ongoing investigation by Darlie's appellate attorneys have raised questions about what really happened that night. Could it be that the police and the prosecutors manipulated the evidence to implicate someone they decided must have done it? A growing chorus of observers of the case believe so. At least half a dozen websites have been set up to proclaim Darlie's innocence. One of them, for DarlieRoutier.org, has received more than 7.5 million hits since January 2000. A juror from her original trial now says that he and his fellow jurors made the wrong decision. You know, it's weird. A lot of these authority-worshipping cultists and these clueless goofs who pretend that juries never get anything wrong and that there aren't any innocent people in prisons, I wonder what they would say to this of jurors who change their mind after the fact. Because there's a lot of goofs out there. Particularly in the Stephen Avery case, making a murder. I mean, there's so many goofs out there who hallucinate that the police would never be involved in any kind of shady business, despite all the evidence, and that jurors could never get it wrong, either being intimidated or not. They're just infallible gods that always get it right. It's a really weird thing. The author of one of the true crime books has also changed her mind, claiming the jury heard perjured testimony and was never shown photos that would have proved Darlie was a victim of a savage attack. Yeah, I mean, this looks like a clear wrongful conviction. Even if she's guilty, this looks like a clear wrongful conviction. Even the most experienced legal hands have found themselves sucked in by the Routier saga. This past March, in oral arguments before the Texas Court of Criminal Appeals into whether procedural flaws were made during the original trial, the 9 judges began peppering lawyers with questions on other aspects of the case. Was there an insurance policy on the children, which might have given Darlie a reason to kill them? When Darlie talked to homicide detectives, did she make any kind of confession? As the hearing ended, one of the more curious judges motioned to me and asked me to point out Darlie's mother, Darlie Key, who had made headlines of her own for her passionate attacks on the assistant DA and Darlie's husband, Darren, a headstrong machinist's son who, after the trial, had likenesses of his wife and their 3 boys tattooed on his right arm. This month, with Darlie's defense attorney set to file a writ of habeas corpus that claims new evidence proves her innocence, the debate is going to get even more heated. Darlie's lead appellate attorney, Stephen Cooper, has announced that an analysis recently conducted by one of the country's most respected forensic anthropologists determined that a bloody fingerprint found on a glass table in the room where the murders took place does not, as the prosecutors contend, match either of the boys. Nor does it match Darlie, Darren, or any of the investigators or emergency workers who were out the house that night. It almost certainly belongs to an unidentified adult, bolstering the defense's theory that someone broke into the house. But the most startling new piece of information, one that has never been publicly revealed before now, could very well answer the most baffling question about the murders. Why would someone show up in a nice new suburban neighborhood, target a house on a well-lit cul-de-sac, enter through a garage window a few feet away from a dog's cage, navigate his way through a darkened utility room, grab a butcher knife from the kitchen, and then head into the living room to stab 2 boys and slice their mother's throat? Although the same could be said for the Idaho homicides case on why somebody would go to a notorious party house right across the street from Greek Row at a university. I mean, kind of crazy on a party night. I mean, it's just crazy. Although several neighbors told the police that they had noticed a dark car slowly cruising the area in the weeks before the crime, one even said that the car occasionally stopped near the Routiers' house. Veteran investigators never believed that Darlie and her sons were the victims of a random attack by a stranger, nor were they able to find anyone who had a reason to harm them. But if there's a dark car slowly cruising the area in the weeks before the crime, see, I think Darlie did mention that there was a car following her in the weeks and possibly months before. But again, we're not going to take her word for it. But if multiple different neighbors are telling the police that there was indeed a dark car that slowly cruised the area, one neighbor said that it actually stopped specifically near the Routier's house. This is really weird. Yet according to Richard Reyna, a private investigator working for Darlie's appellate attorney, Darren Routier, admitted last year that in the spring of '96, when his business was in trouble and he was $22,000 in debt, he had asked Darlie's stepfather, Bob Key, whether he knew anyone who might break into the family's house as part of an insurance scam. This is a mind-shocking detail. I've actually never heard this before. Wow, let me repeat that again. This is insane. So just last year, this would have been 2001, Darren admitted that he asked Darlie's stepfather, Bob Key, whether he knew anyone who might break into the family's house as part of an insurance scam. Once the furniture and other items were, in quotations, stolen, Darren would retrieve them from the burglar and pay him out of the proceeds from his insurance claim. A couple of months ago, when I asked Darren if he had made such a statement, he denied it. But a few days later, when I confronted him with affidavits given to me by Darlie's stepfather and Reyna, he confessed that he had, in fact, talked to Key about faking a burglary. Okay, we are firmly in Mindshock land, because how many other cases where a parent is alleged to have killed the children, was there a plot being hatched to fake a burglary? Now, my initial thought now is, first of all, What kind of people does Bob Key know, and what kind of business is he in? And did he hire somebody to scope out the house? Is that the dark sedan scoping out the house to kind of figure out how they're going to fake this burglary? Did they hire a psychopath who wanted to kill instead of burglarize? Like, what if we're dealing with criminal element? Did they simply hire a guy to burglarize that just wanted to kill? Was he a killer? And he took that opportunity to kill and then he disappeared. And does that explain a lot of the guilt and inconsistencies amongst all the family and their assertion that Darlie actually is innocent? Because she is. She didn't kill anybody. And maybe she didn't even know. Did she even know about this plot? Maybe she did, maybe she didn't. You would think somebody would tell her after the fact, but... When I asked if he had discussed the plan with anybody else, including a couple of reputed car thieves in Rowlett, Darren hesitantly replied, quote, "There is a possibility I said the same thing in conversation with the people that worked around me. I don't remember what I said, but there's a strong possibility that was on my mind, and in conversation I could have said that," end quote. Now, is he lying? But then why would he deny saying this? But then he has the affidavits by Darlie's stepfather and Raina that they said that he said it. So then he finally admitted it. So he reluctantly admitted this because he initially denied. Only when these other affidavits were presented by the other people. I mean, this is insane. What are the chances, statistically, that he's trying to stage a burglary and it has nothing to do with what happened? Because if we, again, I wouldn't take anything from biased parties, but apparently neighbors, now it's unknown which neighbors, because some of the neighbors supposedly thought she did it, some thought she didn't. It would be curious if the neighbors who thought she did it also admitted to seeing the dark sedan cruising the neighborhood and stopping in front of her house. And they just simply wrote, they didn't deny it, but they wrote it off as coincidental or non-related for whatever reason. Yeah, this is really tough. This is really tough because if he's involved with some kind of criminal element, I mean, this is weird. So do they normally sleep upstairs? And on that particular night, as fate would have it, they fell asleep watching TV downstairs when they were supposed to be upstairs. Did the burglar freak out that there were people there? Because if Darren said they all sleep upstairs, so nobody should be downstairs, and if they were woken up by any burglary, he would make sure nobody went downstairs for a certain period of time for the burglar to get away. Or was he not given an exact date on when the burglary would take place? Continuing on with the article here, Darren insisted that he never carried out the plan, and Raina said he has found no evidence to the contrary. The prosecutors who tried the case against Darlie chuckled when I told them about Darren's story, noting that it was suspicious that he would go public just in time for the filing of the writ. They said, but apparently this was known prior, and the affidavits were prior. They said that Darlie, and of course the testimony of the neighbors with the sedan, they said that Darlie's lawyers might be using me to get favorable publicity for their client while the Court of Appeals is considering her case. Anyway, they said, if someone really did break into the house to burglarize it, why didn't he grab some of Darlie's jewelry, which was sitting in plain view on the kitchen counter? Why grab only a butcher knife and commit murder? Well, again, what kind of criminal is this? Did they get some psychotic to carry out this plot and he freaked out because there were people in downstairs when they shouldn't have been? And also, is this some kind of weird, curious psycho who was presented with the opportunity of a sleeping woman and children, and the jewelry's right there on the kitchen counter next to the butcher knife, and he looks at the butcher knife and he decides to enact on some morbid curiosities? I mean, we're talking about a criminal here. We're not talking about a regular person. We're talking about somebody who would burglarize someone's house for money. This is clearly not a moral individual. So that it'd be more likely that he could possibly be some kind of psycho than any random person, possibly even more so than Darlie, a supposedly loving mother. Darren's reluctant admission certainly raises more questions than it answers, but it also suggests some tantalizing what-ifs. If, for instance, Darren's fake burglary scheme had come out before Darlie's trial, prosecutors might still have gone after her, but probably would not have sought the death penalty. In that would have been a tougher case to make. I mean, how many coincidences are we willing to accept here? Because to me, the fact that multiple neighbors corroborated a dark sedan scoping out the area and stopping in front of their house, I mean, that's almost as damning as the bloody fingerprint. I mean, those are certainly more avenues that need to be pursued instead of trying to read into some video of an emotional mother at her children's grave. I mean, come on. Darlie's defense lawyers surely would have used that admission to create reasonable doubt as to her involvement, perhaps leading to her acquittal, regardless of whether she was guilty. Most significantly, if Darren's admission leads to additional confessions about a break-in at the Routier house, it could well prove what Darlie had been saying all along, that she did not kill her kids. Again, just to reiterate here, what are the chances that the husband is trying to hire people for a fake burglary for insurance, and the mother of his children, the children are murdered, and the mother claims there was a burglar? Unless one wants to argue, if Darlie was in on it, she took that opportunity to take 2 children out to kill her 2 children because she knew there was a planned burglary, and the burglar freaked out and ran away because he wanted no part of that, and he was, let's call it an honorable thief, someone who would burglarize but would never kill. I mean, that's really the only scenario that could theoretically explain this. But that's so out there. I mean, that would have had to be, I mean, when has that ever happened? Again, that doesn't mean it didn't happen here, but it's just so out there in terms of plausibility. If a mother is planning to kill her children, is she going to take the opportunity to frame a burglar that her husband is setting up to burglarize the house on an insurance scam? That's a tough one. That's a tough sell right there. Again, I'm not saying it did or didn't happen. This is Mindshock. I am not alleging anything is true or untrue, but that's just a crazy, that would be, I mean, the whole thing's insane. I mean, we are so firmly in Mindshock territory right now. I actually was not expecting this level of Mindshockery. But let's continue here. The Clampetts, or Ozzie and Harriet. Every detail of Darlie Routier's life has been thoroughly examined by reporters, investigators, lawyers, and cops. Academic treatises on maternal filicide have been reviewed again and again to see if any case compares with hers. Yet, even now, no one has been... I mean, this still doesn't explain the sock, though. Because if the burglar came in to burglarize, why would he have the sock? Why would he drop it in the alley? And where was his getaway car? Or were these burglars smart enough not to actually use the vehicle that they scoped the neighborhood out to actually commit the crime? Yeah, it still doesn't explain the sock, but anyway. Actually, I just thought of something else. If the husband knows that she's innocent and he thinks no one might believe her and she doesn't know about the planned burglary, did the husband who's doing CPR, did he run out and throw the sock in the alley to try to make sure that his wife wouldn't be found guilty? Did he have that forward thinking? That's almost more plausible than her trying to throw it out there, isn't it? But let's continue here. Yet even now, no one has been able to come up with a plausible explanation as to why she would have stabbed her boys. Unlike Andrea Yates, Darlie had no history of mental illness or psychotic hallucinations. Unlike Susan Smith, the South Carolina mother who drove her kids into a lake, she had no abuse or incest in her background. She had no criminal record and was not known to have committed adultery. Born in Pennsylvania, Darlie moved to Lubbock as a teenager with her mother and stepfather. She met Darren at Western Sizzlin', where he worked as a cook. Her own mother waited tables there. The 17-year-old boy was immediately infatuated with the bubbly 15-year-old girl with the frosted hair. She was different than anybody I had ever met, Darren recalled, a trendsetter on her own path. They married 4 years later in the garden room of his parents' house. He had been voted most likely to succeed at the small high school while he attended on the outskirts of Lubbock and had planned to prove it. After moving to the Dallas area, he started a small company that tested electronic components, and when he began making money in the early 90s, he and Darlie cut loose. They bought a $130,000 house, adding marble in the bathroom, white carpet in the dining room, and $12,000 worth of drapes in the living room. Wow. They bought a $600 fountain for the front yard and a $9,000 redwood spa for the back. Darren purchased a 30-foot cabin cruiser to use on nearby Lake Ray Hubbard and a 1982 Jaguar to drive to and from work. When Darlie's beloved cat died, she spent $800 for a tombstone to put it over its grave at a pet cemetery. In 95, Darren's company brought in about $500,000 in gross revenue, and he paid himself an annual salary of $125,000. At the time, we were in the top 2% of the tax bracket for our age, he told me more than once. And they spent every cent they made. Their neighbors thought they were a hoot, Rowlett's version of the Clampettes from the Beverly Hillbillies. Darren wore shirts with the sleeves rolled up to show his muscles, grew his hair long in the back, and sported a diamond watch and gold nugget and diamond rings. Darlie got size 36 triple D breast implants that she showed off in tight-fitting tops, made regular visits to the tanning salon, and wore diamond rings on every finger. She bought a toy Pomeranian with white hair matching her own. Even if they were a little flashy, they were not disliked. One neighbor called them Ozzie and Harriet of the 90s. Darlie was known as a cookie-baking housewife who always let the neighborhood kids hang out at her house, which they called the Nintendo house because of the elaborate game room that Darren had designed. After her arrest, several of those kids put signs in her front yard proclaiming her innocence. She cooked for neighbors going through hard times and even made a mortgage payment for a neighbor with cancer. Wow. In early 96, Darren's business began to suffer and he got behind on the bills. He was at least a month late on the mortgage and owed $10,000 in back taxes to the IRS and $12,000 on credit cards. But if the financial problems were causing stress in their marriage, no one in the neighborhood saw it. Darren decided to start a second business called Champagne Wishes, in which he would take people around the lake on his boat at sunset while they sipped champagne and, if they wished, used the boat's bedroom. Darren's difficulties didn't seem to concern Darlie either. Her shopping never slowed, and she made plans to take a trip that summer to Cancun with some friends. See, that's interesting, too, because the people saying that she did this for either the $10,000 insurance payout or because she was stressed about having no money, if Darren never really told her about their money problems or the extent of which many husbands would never do, or whether he did or she didn't even care, so she's still spending like crazy on credit, making trips, etc. So if the lifestyle is still there, regardless if the money's there to back it up, I mean, it seems like if she would snap, she would have snapped much later when the lifestyle could no longer be supported. Again, these are just my observations. But people who've actually studied this type of lavish spending and the exact mental breaking points on when it stops, they can chime in here. Continuing on here, but on May 3rd, about a month before the murders, Darlie made an unusual entry in her otherwise upbeat diary. Quote, "I hope that one day you will forgive me for what I am about to do," she wrote. "My life has been such a hard fight for a long time, and I just can't find the strength to keep fighting anymore," end quote. On that day, she considered taking some sleeping pills to kill herself, but she never took them and never finished her diary entry. After talking with her on the phone, Darren became worried and came home to comfort her. At that point, she told me she was ashamed of what she had done and never thought about taking her life again. And another interesting statistics here is women are much more likely to go through the motions of attempting suicide than actually following through on them versus, for example, men who, when they make the decision to kill themselves, they usually follow through, much higher percentage than women. Just another thought here. Also, what are the exact details of that circumstance? Because, again, how many people have a story similar to that? I don't know. Darlie said her blah feeling, as she put it, was because she hadn't gotten her period in more than a year. When it arrived a few days after her suicidal thoughts, she said her spirits soared. Okay, so was this some kind of hormonal thing? In fact, people who saw her in the weeks that followed said she did not seem particularly despondent. Her old friend Barbara Jovel did tell Darlie that she should get some counseling or perhaps enter a treatment center, as she herself had done when she once felt suicidal. But Jovel didn't sense that Darlie was desperate or self-destructive, and she certainly didn't act differently. In late May, Darlie and Darren took the boys to Scarborough Fair, a festival featuring characters dressed in medieval costumes. Darlie, flamboyant as always, wore a silky belly dancing outfit. On June 5th, the boys played in the hot tub, and that evening, Damon and Devon huddled under blankets in front of a television Darren had just installed in the living room. Darlie and Darren would later say they stayed up talking past midnight, then kissed each other good night. Darren went upstairs to the master bedroom where Drake, then 7 months old, was asleep while Darlie curled up on the couch downstairs next to the two older boys. She had been sleeping on the couch that week, she said, because she wanted to watch over Damon and Devon, who had been spending the night downstairs since school let out, and because she was a light sleeper and would sometimes be awakened by Drake turning over in his crib. Okay, so it seems like it was common, or at least since school ended that week, that they were all sleeping on the couch. So it seems like Darren wouldn't have scheduled a burglary if he knew they were sleeping down there, or did they just start doing that? Well, when did school let out? This is June 6th. School doesn't let out that much earlier than that, does it? So was that just a couple days and he was either unaware? I mean, huh. A few hours later, a 911 dispatcher in Rowlett received a frantic call. Somebody came in here, Darlie screamed. They just stabbed me and my children. And this photo here, again, of her being arrested, I mean, this just looks like... I mean, is it her being arrested? Taken to Gatesville, February 5th, 97. She's wearing white. Yeah, it looks like it. I mean, she looks so despondent and just meant... I mean, again, could this be a guilty party, or is she more likely... I mean, just the level of sadness here is so off the charts here. I mean, barring split personality, I mean, it's real. Yeah, I don't know. It's really tough. Let's continue here. The case against her. The first tip-off for the cops was a 911 call. Why, in the midst of that craziness, did Darlie feel the need to tell the dispatcher that she had picked up the butcher's knife, that her fingerprints were on it, and that she hoped they would still be able to get the prints off the attacker? Yeah, that is a little strange, because she's already... She should be preoccupied emotionally with the fact that her children are dead or dying, as opposed to finding their kill. I mean, finding their killer, obviously they would want justice, but usually that's not in the one. I don't know. In the second, you'd probably be more preoccupied with your kids. I mean, I don't know. One of the first officers at the scene was also perplexed that Darlie didn't tend to her sons, even when he asked her to. Instead, she held a towel to her own neck. Nurses at the hospital where Darlie was taken said that when she was told that her sons were dead, she exhibited a flat effect and did not dissolve into hysteria, as other mothers often do upon learning that they have lost their children. Also, if she already kind of knew at the scene, I mean, I don't know. After the murders, Darlie gave conflicting accounts of what exactly the intruder had done to her. One officer said she told him that she had struggled with her assailant on the couch. Another officer said she told him the struggle was at the kitchen counter. A friend who talked to Darlie while she was in the hospital said Darlie told her that she remembered lying on the couch as the man was running the knife over her face, but in her formal written statement to the police, Darlie said her only view of the man came as he was walking away from the couch. Well, if she was sleeping and she was cut while sleeping and she's drifting in and out of consciousness, I mean, that would all be normal, wouldn't it? I mean, again, just theorizing, that's if she's innocent. Like, you could also explain it that way. If she was guilty, I mean, would she make up all these different stories if she was guilty? Again, it's kind of weird, because if she's guilty, I don't know. She said she couldn't remember any distinct details about the attack or the killer, except that he was wearing dark clothes and a baseball cap. Here's the other thing, though. If she's guilty, wouldn't she make up some fake description? Was it really possible that Darlie, who could be awakened by her baby moving in his crib, had slept through the stabbings of her sons a few feet away? Unless, of course, if she was sleeping and the burglar was being really quiet and just came up and slashed her throat first, and she was conscious or unconscious or semi-conscious. The cops' suspicions grew when the doctors and nurses who treated Darlie told them that her wounds could have been self-inflicted. Then I mean, how many times does someone self-inflict an injury to their own throat? Unless, of course, if she is trying to kill herself, then okay. But then a few days after leaving the hospital, she showed the police dark bruises that covered her arms from wrist to elbow. Yet the doctors who examined her said the bruises were too fresh to have been inflicted on the night of the attacks. More likely, they said, Darlie hit her arms with a blunt instrument after she left the hospital, or had someone else do it to convince the police she had been attacked. Okay, this is crazy, because if she did not self-inflict these new injuries and bruises, I mean, who did it? Did she find out about the possible burglary and she had a fight with Darren and he did it? Or did the people who organized the burglary, if that's what it was, did they beat her up? After studying the crime scene, the police noticed that the soak, or in a new emotional state, did she in fact self-inflict those because she was so stressed out, if she's innocent, about being thought of as guilty, because now she has time to think about everything and realize that they might think she's guilty. So even an innocent person, if they're highly emotional, maybe they would do that again. I don't know. Someone who loses their children, I mean, you can't expect them to act logically or sanely after that. I mean, that's something you never, I mean, that's just impossible to even think about. It's just so tragic and insane. After studying the crime scene, the police noticed that the so-called intruder had apparently gotten into the house by slashing a window screen that covered a low garage window, then stepping through the slit. Why, the cops asked, didn't the intruder just pull off the screen as burglars normally do? Why did he only slice Darlie's throat and stab her in the shoulder and forearm instead of plunging his knife deep into her body the way he plunged it into the bodies of her boys? Why not make sure that Darlie was dead so that she would not be able to identify him? Well, the counter argument there is, what if he slashed her throat first and he thought that would be enough? And then when it wasn't, and at some point later there was a struggle, that's when the shoulder and arm injuries occurred. Just a thought there. Again, I don't know. To evaluate the veracity of Darlie's story, especially if this is some kind of crazy lunatic burglar, I mean, you can't expect them to act sanely, especially if maybe this was his first killing. He doesn't know what's going on. To evaluate the veracity of Darlie's story, a forensic expert tried to replicate the intruder's series of moves, dropping a bloody knife from waist height into the utility room floor while making his way toward the garage door. The blood spattered across the floor in a pattern that looked entirely different from the little pools found in the utility room the night of the murders. When a chemical called luminol was sprayed around the kitchen to reveal traces of blood not visible to the naked eye, bloodstains were discovered in the sink, the kind that would be consistent with someone washing off blood off his or her hands. There was also an indication, well, how do they know the burglar didn't wipe his hands in the sink? The kind that would be consistent with someone washing blood off his or her hands. There was also an indication that some of Darlie's blood around the sink had been wiped up with a towel. In her various statements to the police, she had never mentioned standing by the sink. Was it possible that she had cut her own throat at the sink and then tried to wipe up the blood? When another blood expert found tiny drops of the boy's blood on the back of the Victoria's Secret nightshirt that Darlie had worn that evening, he remarked that a likely way the blood could have gotten there was when it dripped off the butcher knife and onto Darlie's back as she was raising her arm above her while stabbing the boys. Wasn't she curled up with them, though? So if anybody was stabbing the boys, wouldn't blood drops go everywhere? Then Charles Lynch, Dallas County's premier trace evidence analyst, dropped a bombshell. He said that he had found a bread knife in the kitchen that contained a nearly invisible fiber, 60 microns long, made of fiberglass coated with rubber. Under a microscope, Lynch had determined that the fiber found on the bread knife looked exactly like the fiberglass in the window screen cut by the intruder. Was this the knife used to cut the screen? If so, only someone already inside the house could have cut it. And because Darren's story that he had run downstairs and given CPR to Devon until an officer arrived was consistent with the physical evidence, the police were left with a single suspect, Darlie. That's interesting. Dallas County's premier trace evidence analyst. Okay. Now here's my question. If the police had tunnel vision and they needed something to secure a conviction, would they have planted that? Would they have taken the knife and cut the screen and put it back and then found it, so-called found it? Again, anybody unfamiliar with how police corruption works, again, that doesn't mean they thought she was innocent. Maybe they really did think she did it and they just needed that home run. And this is what they went with instead of trying to figure out the bloody fingerprint and trace the black sedan. The case against her. There was just one problem. On the night of the murders, one of Darren's socks was found down a back alley some 75 yards away from the house. It contained 2 small spots of blood from Damon and Devon, but none of Darlie's blood. What was the sock doing there? Police initially speculated that Darlie had carried the sock 3 houses away to make it look as if the intruder had dropped it during his escape. But they could find none of Darlie's blood or anyone else's blood outside the house. There was no blood on the back patio or the back fence or in the back alley. If Darlie had planted the sock, how could she avoid leaving a trail of her own? Once her throat was cut, she lost significant amounts of blood. The detectives and also just losing that much blood and the stress of what was going on, And I mean, just the severe trauma, even without all the injuries, just the severe trauma could definitely cause some memory issues. The detectives and the prosecutors came up with an interesting theory. Darlie stabbed her boys to death, ran the sock down the alley, perhaps to give the impression that the intruder had used it to keep his prints off the knife, then cut herself at the kitchen sink. Either before she stabbed the boys or before she stabbed herself, she cut the window screen with the bread knife. Once all that was done, she called for Darren and then called 911. But if Darlie wanted the cops to find the sock, wouldn't she have thrown it closer to the house, perhaps at the end of the driveway, instead of leaving it so far away next to a garbage can where the police might have overlooked it? Okay, so, and wouldn't she have doused the sock in blood so the police would know what they had found? Okay, yeah, this is even more suspicious because, yeah, why do that? Because if it's a sock that doesn't even have visible traces of blood and it was put right next to a trash can, where, why, and 75 yards away, not right next to the house, that could easily be overlooked. And even then, would Darlie have had time to do everything before the police arrived? Records indicate that Darlie was on the phone with the 911 dispatcher for 5 minutes and 44 seconds. Just as that call was ending, a police officer came into the house and was there for at least a minute before paramedics arrived. The paramedics found Damon still breathing. He died shortly after. Why is that important? According to a doctor who studied the severity and location of Damon's stab wounds, the boy could not have lived longer than 9 minutes once he was stabbed and probably lived no more than 6 minutes. Let's assume he lived 9 minutes. If you subtract from that 9 minutes her 5 minute and 44 second phone call to 911, then subtract the additional minute and 10 seconds that she was in the presence of a police officer, Darlie had only 2 minutes and 6 seconds to stab her sons, head for the garage, step through the slit in the window, jump a fence back or go through the back gate, run barefoot for 75 yards down an alley, drop a bloody sock, run 75 yards back, stab herself, clean up the blood around the sink, and stage whatever crime scene there was left to be staged. The prosecutors did not have a good answer to the timeline conundrum except to say that the doctor was simply guessing about the 9 minutes it took Damon to die. Shouldn't they have gotten like a whole bunch of second opinions to see what everybody thought about that? And even that Darlie could have had enough time to commit the murders and stage the crime scene. But if she was smart enough to plant fake evidence, wouldn't she have already been ready with a more believable story about what the intruder looked like and how the killings occurred? That's a great point. Would she have been so stupid as to tell police that she had slept through the attacks and that she could not remember what happened? If Darlie is indeed a calculating murderer, wouldn't she have made sure both boys were dead before she called 911 so they could not finger her as the attacker? Wouldn't she also have made sure to get rid of her diary so that the cops wouldn't see her suicidal musings? Wouldn't she have made sure to weep at the hospital so that the nurses would see the depth of her grief? And when she went to the cemetery on Devon's birthday in the presence of television cameras, wouldn't she have made sure to turn on the tears instead of singing and spraying silly string? What really made no sense was why she chose Damon and Devon to kill. If Darlie, as the cops and prosecutors believed, had become increasingly upset about money, why didn't she murder Darren and cash in his $800,000 life insurance policy? The policies on Damon and Devon totaled only $10,000, and their funerals alone cost more than $14,000. If she was overwhelmed by the stresses of motherhood, another theory, then why didn't she also kill Drake, the baby, who required most of her attention? I actually, even though I am leaning innocent here, I already explained the explanations for those, because if she really was planning to kill all of them, and then for whatever reason she stopped midway through, that could explain that. At her trial, Darlie's lawyer, Doug Mulder, one of Dallas's most prominent and charismatic criminal defense attorneys, kept asking the jurors if they really believed that a doting mother could, in the course of a single summer night, pop popcorn for her boys, watch a movie with them, and then suddenly snap and turn into a knife-wielding nut. A psychiatrist who had interviewed Darlie for 14 hours after her arrest said she was telling the truth about the attacks, and that her loss of memory about certain details was the result of traumatic amnesia, which can occur following emotionally overwhelming events. I would also think that for maybe simple people, now I'm not saying she's simple, but if she is a simple Texas bleached blonde girl, perhaps the chances of her being able to mentally cope with such a tragedy, like the chances of that are lower than a different individual, and she'd be more likely to have memory loss because of the trauma. Also, it'd be interesting to get more opinions from different psychiatrists, but this is the main psychiatrist, the first main one who interviewed her for 14 hours, said she was telling the truth. That's interesting. Obviously, a brain fingerprint scan would solve all these problems. Vincent DeMaio, the chief medical examiner in San Antonio and the editor-in-chief of the prestigious Journal of Forensic Medicine Pathology, testified that her injuries were not at all consistent with the self-inflicted wounds he had seen in the past. So this guy's not a random nobody. He's the editor-in-chief of the Journal of Forensic Medical Pathology, saying that her wounds are not self-inflicted. He said that the cut across her throat in particular was hardly superficial, as the prosecutors alleged. Mulder produced notes taken by the nurses at the hospital that said Darlie was tearful, frightened, crying, visibly upset, and very emotional on the night that she was brought in. It would also be curious if there were security cameras in the hospital at that time. I mean, this is mid-90s, so maybe. Mulder produced notes taken by the nurses. Okay. Finally, Darlie herself took the stand, explaining that she had stood at the kitchen sink to wet towels and place them on her children's wounds, and that the silly string scene was her heartfelt way of wishing a happy birthday to Devon, who she hoped was watching from heaven. And again, if she is this simple blonde and she's not really thinking about how this all looks, that's actually a very plausible explanation. Darlie, however, was not a persuasive witness. She cried at odd times and became far too defensive under the cross-examination of Toby Shook, the veteran Dallas County prosecutor who kept slamming her for what he called her selective amnesia. One of the prosecution's expert witnesses aggressively promoted the theory that Darlie was guilty, and in the end, the evidence, however circumstantial, was too much for the jurors, even if they could never figure out how the bloody sock got down the alley. I mean, the details about the sock barely having any blood on it and being so far away and placed next to the trash, that's tough. That's tough. During their deliberations, they watched the silly string video a reported 7 times. So that's what they're just watching the whole time, this is, instead of fixating on the unidentified bloody print and the black sedan. Perhaps Mulder made a mistake in not introducing another videotape secretly recorded by the police that showed Darlie weeping over her son's graves. Perhaps the outcome would have been different had he found more expert witnesses to counter the prosecution's experts. But even then, it's hard to see how a jury would have gotten over the finely honed image of Darlie as a mentally unbalanced, gum-chewing, bleach blonde who seemed to be unmoved, if not outright exhilarated, over the deaths of her children. See, here's the thing. Again, to me, I'm definitely leaning innocence now. But if this is more of a, pardon the expression here, airhead, bleached blonde chewing gum, how many of those actually turn out to be cold, sadistic murderers? It's usually these seemingly quiet and not boisterous housewives that end up like this. Again, doesn't mean she's innocent in any way. That just makes me lean a particular way because all these things can be explained away. And then we have the unidentified bloody fingerprint and the black sedan and the admissions of the husbands that he's planning a staged robbery for insurance money. Scenarios. In the years since Darlie's conviction, various well-wishers have attempted to prove her innocence. A writer in the Dallas suburb of Louisville who published a book on the case told reporters that he believed the killer was the son of a Rowlett police detective. See, that would explain some things with the investigation, wouldn't it? Especially if the bread knife, if the fibers from the screen were planted on the bread knife. A Waco millionaire, Brian Pardo, reportedly spent $100,000 on an independent investigation of the murders, conducting handwriting analyses and other tests on Darlie. He also persuaded Darren to take a lie detector test administered by a Waco police officer. Pardo told reporters that Darren was shown to be lying when he answered no to 4 questions. Was he involved in any plan to commit a crime at his house on June 6, 96? Did he stab Darlie? Did he know who planted the sock in the alley? Could he name the person who stabbed Darlie? Wow. I mean, I would expect him to fail the first one because he's denying the burglary, but he failed stabbing Darlie, knowing who planted the sock in the alley, and naming the person who stabbed Darlie. Darren did not deny that he failed the test, but told me that he was being manipulated by the examiner who had spent 2 hours upsetting him with a million questions about the murders before hooking up to the polygraph. Okay, I mean, maybe. Again, brain fingerprint scan's the way to go here, so we'd have to deal with that. Darren also speculated that he was suffering from survivor's guilt, in which he envisioned himself at the scene trying to help the kids, but was unable to reach them. According to knowledgeable sources, Darlie, too, was given a lie detector test by one of her original court-appointed attorneys. The attorney refuses to comment on the results, which have never been made public. That's curious, but here's why that doesn't mean anything. Because maybe she's innocent of the really damning questions, but she failed a couple of other questions which make her look guilty in a different way, in which case they wouldn't want to release that. Or, of course, she either failed all of them. You would think if she passed absolutely all of them, the defense would want to release that, unless they're saving it for the appeal and they don't want to release. I mean, I don't know what the strategy could be there. But again, brain fingerprint scan, obviously the way to go. Polygraph tests are not admissible in court, so they proved of no value to Darlie's court-appointed appellate attorney, Stephen Cooper. But Darren intrigued him. Beginning in '98, operating out of a cluttered office near downtown Dallas, Cooper gulped down coffee and smoked cigarettes as he worked nonstop on the case, eventually covering his floor with more than 25 boxes of Darlie-related files. Last year, Cooper filed his first brief with the Court of Criminal Appeals to get Darlie a new trial. Among his many claims, conflict of interest by Doug Mulder. Cooper said Mulder should have raised questions before the jury about Darren's potential involvement in the murders, but couldn't because for a single day before taking on Darlie as a client, he had represented Darren and Darlie's mother at a pretrial hearing over a gag order. Cooper alleged that Mulder could have learned something from Darren about what had really happened that night, but was unable to use it because of loyalty to a former client. Wow, these are serious conflicts of interest. I mean, this is a complete mistrial here. I mean, this is insane. This is important, according to Cooper's brief, because Darren was a plausible suspect. He not only had a pecuniary motive to get rid of Darlie, her life insurance policy cashed out at $200,000 to $250,000, but he had the means and the opportunity to commit the crime. Darren, said Cooper, could have slashed the window screen and then carried the sock out to the alley without leaving a blood trail because he had not been stabbed himself. Or he could have done that first if he was planning it all along. Mulder recently told me that he had represented Darren for less than an hour that day and that Darren had told him nothing about the murders. Mulder said that he would have quickly and happily pointed the finger at Darren, but that every time he asked Darlie if her attacker could possibly have been her husband, she said absolutely not. And again, is that because she's simple and she just doesn't want to believe that's a possibility and it's too much for her mind to handle, so she convinced herself that it wasn't him, even if it was, and she saw his face. And possibly Darren realized that, so there was no need to finish the job. Maybe. I don't know. Or, of course, he just hired somebody else. Did he? Okay, hold on a second. So Darren admitted to possibly wanting to do this fake burglary. What did he not admit to? Was it more than a burglary? Was he hired? Did he possibly want to hire someone to kill her as well? Because her life insurance policy is big. I mean, why would he kill his own kids either only for $10,000? Her life insurance policy is $200,000 to $250,000. I mean, that could possibly get them out of trouble. $10,000 wouldn't do anything. I asked Mulder if he had ever heard a rumor while preparing for trial that Darren was looking for someone to burglarize the house before the murders. Never, he said. But according to the affidavit given to me by Darlie's stepfather, Bob Key, Darren said in the spring of '96 that he had a plan in which he and his family would be gone from the house and that a burglar hired by him would pull up with a U-Haul, remove household items, and keep them hidden until the insurance company paid the claim. All that was needed, Darren said, was someone to do the job. The soft-spoken Key, who lives with Darlie's mother on a small farm east of Dallas, told me that when the murders first happened, his conversation with Darren never crossed my mind. When I asked him why he didn't later get the information into the hands of Darlie's lawyers, he said, I don't have a good answer to that other than, I don't know. Maybe he didn't want to get Darren in trouble, or maybe, as implausible as it seems, he failed to make a connection between Darren's plan and the murders. I mean, how is that possible? Darlie's mother, Darlie Key, told me that she had never wanted to consider the possibility that Darren was involved. She loved him like a son. But in March 2000, after Darren seemed to be getting increasingly upset over questions from Richard Reyna, Cooper's PI, she began to have second thoughts. And her husband told her for the first time the particulars of his long-ago conversation with Darren. She immediately called Stephen Cooper. Here's a quick counterpoint, though, because if Darren feels like the PI is now setting him up to be the fall guy, he could possibly be getting upset with that because he knows it's not true. So that's not necessarily damning in his direction. Could Darlie's husband, mother, and stepfather be making the whole thing up to get her a new trial? Raina grilled Darren repeatedly about the story and said he believes Darren was looking for someone to hire. He said he even got Darren to admit to him that he worked out another scam a couple of years before the murders in which he had his car stolen so he could collect the insurance money. Wow. Darren told me that he did not arrange for his Jaguar to be stolen, but he admitted saying to the person who he believed eventually stole the car, it wouldn't bother me if it was gone. Wait, what? So he's saying he didn't wait, okay. What the heck does that mean? So is that like some weird suggestion to a car thief? It wouldn't bother me if my car was gone, and then the car goes missing? So is he telling the truth in the sense that he didn't say directly, steal my car for insurance money? He just said, it wouldn't bother me if the car was gone. That's really weird, and he admitted that. Okay, if Darren's fake, Darren would not deny to me that the person who broke into his house and murdered his sons could have been someone who had heard him discuss his would-be insurance scam. But he said he had no idea who that person might be, and if such a crime did happen, it was without his assistance. Why would I do that if I had my kids and wife downstairs, he said. That's the craziest story I've ever heard. When I told him that the complete truth might help his wife get a new trial, he insisted he wanted to do what he could for Darlie. But I don't want to end up with some kind of BS charges brought against me either, he said. I don't want to help her at the expense of my life. This is in quotations. Huh. You know what's weird, though? What if he thought they weren't going to be downstairs, though? That's the thing. And then also, what if there wasn't an exact plan? Like there wasn't an exact date, he had discussed it. And also, what if he went to some kind of organized crime element? I mean, he still has his own life to worry about and the surviving son. So at this point, would he really blow the whistle on some organized crime if he thinks they would retaliate and kill him and his other son? Because his two older sons, they're gone. Just to get his wife out of jail, and he believes they might kill her again anyway, and him and his other son, would he keep quiet about some kind of organized crime connection? Raina said he wonders if Darren is holding back even more secrets. After interviewing both Darren and Darlie, he got the idea that Darren might have hired someone to kill her. He said Darlie told him that she had been threatening to divorce Darren, a fact that has never been made public. He said Darren was once so upset over Darlie's threat of divorce that he had put a pistol to his head. Was it possible that Darren had decided that if he was going to lose Darlie, he wasn't going to let anyone else have her? Darlie told me she was never serious about divorcing Darren. Only once, added Darren, did she pack a suitcase and spend the night with a girlfriend, quote, because she thought I was working too much and not showing her enough attention, end quote. Again, this is probably not unusual in all of the millions and tens of millions of housewives out there. There's probably a lot that have done that at least once. The pistol incident, which Darren characterized as dramatic BS to get her attention, like she does to me all the time, happened 2 full years before the murders. Me and Darlie, we've had our spats, but it's never been serious, Darren said. I've never hit her. I've never cheated on her. When I asked him about Raina's suggestion that he would want Darlie killed, Darren replied in a disgusted tone of voice that's completely false and ridiculous. Here's where the what-ifs come into play. What if Darren is lying and really did hire someone to kill Darlie? Once he realized Damon and Devon were sleeping downstairs a few feet from their mother, wouldn't he have called the thing off rather than risk the lives of his sons? Well, here's the thing. What if whoever he was dealing with didn't give him a date? So he didn't know when it was going to happen. So he didn't know that she would have been with the other sons. And who knows? I mean, we don't know what happened behind the scenes. If this is not organized crime and just some random criminals, how do we know Darren didn't hunt them down and kill them for killing his sons as well? We don't know any of that. But here's the final mind shocks here. This is forensicfilesnow.com, July 6, 2018 article. Drake Routier, 4 things to know about Darlie Routier's son. And there are some clues here. Despite the upheaval of the murders of brothers Damon and Devon Routier and the imprisonment of the mother for homicide, Drake Routier grew into the most adaptable kid I've ever seen. His father, Darren, told reporter Liz Stevens, who wrote about the Routiers in a Fort Worth Star-Telegram article. The article, published when Drake was 2 years old, described him as a normal, lively, and resembling his mother with startled blue eyes and a delicate mouth.
Now, in his early 20s, Drake has beaten the odds in a number of ways. In an on-camera CNN interview, he doesn't act like a young man who's consumed with bitterness or anger, and he apparently has stated of trouble with the law. No small accomplishment in an age when the children of politicians and celebrities tend to pop up on mugshots.com. Drake has said he believes in his mother's innocence, and he has visited Darlie, 48, regularly in the Mountain View unit, where she's one of 6 women on death row in a state with the most active execution chamber in the U.S. Here are 5 realities drawn from internet research about his life. Reality number 1. Drake's father, Darren Routier, didn't take custody of him right away after the murders because he wanted to get his finances in order. Liz Stevens reported, after putting Darlie in jail with bail set at $1 million, the state of Texas placed baby Drake in a foster home in 96. A court later gave custody to his father's parents, Cyrilda and Leonard Routier. Meanwhile, Darren, once a successful computer hardware entrepreneur, lost the family's huge Georgian-style house, cabin cruiser, and his 1986 Jaguar. He started over in Lubbock and eventually had Drake move in with him. See, is this a red flag? Because he's not even, how are the relatives not getting him? Like, would a father allow his son to go into foster care? This is weird to me. This is really weird. Reality 2, Drake found out in 2013 he had acute lymphocytic leukemia, which is the most common type of cancer in children, and treatments result in a good chance for a cure, according to the Mayo Clinic. On October 13, 2016, Drake finished his last cancer treatment at the Children's Medical Hospital in Dallas, according to a message his maternal grandmother posted online. An AP story dated June 18, 2018, reported that Drake was in remission, according to Richard A. Smith, a defense lawyer for his mother. Reality 3, Drake told CNN he's had to accept his identity as the kid whose mother is on death row. Darlie and other family members have been denigrated in the media ever since her arrest 11 days after the murders. During the trial, prosecutor attorneys labeled Routier's relatives trailer trash and portrayed the Rowlett couple as a tacky, nouveau rich with twisted priorities, according to the Fort Worth Star-Telegram. The public chimed in too. A pawn shop clerk noted that Darlie often came to her store braless and used foul language, the newspaper reported. Wow, I mean, was this case really just tried in the media? Because who gives a crap about any of that? A lot of people do that. Reality number 4, Drake's visits to his mother, who's been on death row for 21 years, take place with a sheet of glass between them. In addition to denying friends and family members physical contact with death row inmates, the Texas Department of Criminal Justice limits visits to 2 hours in duration that encourages conservative dressing. For example, visitors past the age of adolescence cannot wear shorts or skirts shorter than 3 inches above the knee. Reality number 5, although deprived of his mother's embrace, Drake has grown up with many other people who love him. For instance, Jerry Dale Jackson, the father of Darren Routier's girlfriend Cindy, considered Drake to be his own. Jackson's obituary in the Weatherford Democrat in 2017 listed Drake as one of his grandchildren. Okay, so this is pretty weird. Now, if she's innocent, I mean, how much money would she be owed for all this? Not even allowed to embrace her surviving son. I mean, that's unconscionable. I mean, this is really weird. A mother actually commented here regarding the knife on why she picked up the knife if it was close to the children. It's a natural instinct for a mother to get any knife away from the kids. So she wouldn't necessarily think about getting her fingerprints on it until after she was calling the police and she realized what she had done. And possibly, I mean, of course, he could have been wearing gloves, but then what's the other bloody fingerprint about? Another interesting thought here too, like if she planted the sock, why didn't she take the jewelry from the kitchen counter as well and just toss it somewhere or bury it? Like if she can run 75 yards, why not toss it? I mean, yeah, I don't know. Or run another 50 yards and put it in someone's trash. They're not going to go through everybody's trash. Or did they? I mean, you would think they wouldn't go through 50 neighbors' trash randomly. So, I mean, she could have easily got rid of the jewelry if she was staging it to make it look like a burglary. Another commenter is talking about the dog Domain. Their dog, who supposedly barks a lot, never barked, and supposedly there were motion lights, and allegedly the motion lights never got turned on. So is this a case of, if again Darren is Did Darren disable them? But then why didn't the dog bark? Huh. Yeah, there's so many unanswered questions here. Another point is that the Routiers invited the local news crew to the cemetery to film them. Huh. In exchange for airfare for relatives? Or interviews? Huh. So there's a few different tapes, though. Was that the solemn one? The graveside party was filmed by the local news crew, but apparently that's not the same tape. Rowlett PD placed surveillance equipment in the cemetery, so there might have been a few different tapes. Other people are speculating that if Darren is dealing with some unsavory characters, possibly also using drugs, possibly meth heads, who knows what they would do? Would they kill people? Would they even know what was going on? If he's dealing with really low-end criminals who are not professionals, is this the kind of result we get? Also, if it was Darren, possibly he had another accomplice and it was scheduled for that night, and who knows how that possibly could have gotten botched. A commenter mentioned that there was a dog track, and that's what led them to the sock. They didn't randomly see it. And they lost the trail right there, and they were speculating that that's where the vehicle, the burglar and or killer, whoever the perpetrator was, he left at a car parked not far from the sock. Huh. Here's a comment from Robert. Very interesting. We'll close this episode out with this comment. I grew up living next door to Darren's parents in Lubbock. Very nice people. My brother and I used to play with Devon and Damon when they'd come to town. I remember it always kind of annoyed us because they were younger than us, and well, you know how kids are. After the murders, Drake moved in next door and became an honorary part of our family. We always had baby Drake with us, whether it be to babysit him or just go next door and get him for a while because we loved him and wanted to see him. I was 12 or so when the murders happened. Obviously, because I lived next door to the Routiers, my thoughts on the case have always been heavily influenced on the side of her being not guilty, and due to personal involvement with the family, certainly hope that she isn't guilty. But here it is, well over 20 years later, and I find myself on the fence. I think in my heart of hearts, if I'm completely honest with myself, I believe she's probably guilty. But because of all the circumstances and the way I grew up so personally close to the family, I can't seem to stop being on Team Darlie. But it's probably due to hope. Anyways, I know this comment probably isn't very helpful or insightful on any facts pertaining to the case. I just wanted to share. Haven't seen Drake in years, and he no doubt doesn't even remember me. But if he ever reads this, know that at one time in your life, we saw each other almost every day, and I loved you like a baby brother. Keep kicking your cancer's ass, Bubba, and hope and pray that life brings you as much happiness that is absolutely possible. And just for some assurance that I'm not making this up, tell grandmommy who lived next door in the red brick 2-story house with a guest house in the backyard that Robert says hi and wishes her and all of you my best. You know what's curious, too? Is this a case of overcompensation? Because it's someone who's smart enough to realize that they're biased. I mean, that's a rare thing. So is he overcompensating in the other direction that she might be guilty? Because he knows he's biased? Again, that was just an interesting comment because I haven't seen something like that. I mean, this case has things that are just not seen in any other case. So lots to think about. I might do a follow-up episode if there's more info here. I think we went over quite a lot. This might be the most comprehensive and exhaustive podcast on this case. We did it in typical Mindshock fashion with logic and reason at the forefront, trying to go through every single possible theory. All the Mindshock listeners, let me know if I've left out anything or if you have your own theories, thoughts, debunkings, or rebuttals of any kind in the comments section. As always, if you want to help support the podcast, you can donate to our PayPal. Just check the link in the description. You can also become a member for access to exclusive streams and chats right here on YouTube. Make sure you're subscribed, like and share Twitter, Facebook, Reddit, Patreon, and of course, if you're not getting notifications, just like more videos and leave plenty of comments and you should get them. This is Bruce McGuire signing off. Catch you guys next time.